I'm pleased to be here. I'm always pleased to be in Norwich because normally when I come here, I come to watch Fulham play Norwich. And anyone who knows anything about Fulham's sorry past is that we're not very good away from home, but we always come back from Norwich with at least a point. So, and we both got relegated, so I'll get the chance to do it again this coming season. Look, I realise time is very pressing, so I'm going to try and condense what I was going to say, really, just to make a few remarks about the region and then some issues around Labour's policy position, and then we'll have a chat after that, Judith. I'm very conscious of the importance of the East of England as in the energy sector for the reasons that actually just been outlined in terms of the balance and the breadth of the mix which exists in this part of the country. In one of my previous lives, I was a GMB trade union official and for the GMB London region, and in GMB world, London region means north of the Thames and east of England. So I used to spend a lot of my time in Lowestoft and in Yarmouth and talking to some of my who were to become colleagues and ex-colleagues, people like Bob Blizzard and Tony Wright, of talking about the potential there was, and this was back in the sort of mid to late 90s, in relation to some of the energy developments that could happen in this area. And a lot of that potential has been starting to be realised, but I'm very, very conscious there's a huge amount more that can be achieved. I suppose, would just make a couple of remarks around decommissioning, which I think decommissioning is something which I'm not sure whether you've touched on that in detail during the course of the conference, but the depletion of North Sea oil fields and gas fields creates two pressures. I think the burden of decommissioning existing assets and a requirement that future exploration and extraction is conducted in the most efficient way possible. And the reason I make that point is that people will be, I'm sure, very aware of the Wood Review and the proposals that are coming from that in terms of legislation. And I've met Ian Wood 3 times in the past 6 months to talk to him about these issues. And to be clear, because sometimes the bits where politicians disagree are the bits that you hear about, the bits where there's more agreement perhaps you don't always hear about. But the Labour Party is in support of the Wood Review and the measures that will come forward through that. There obviously are challenges turning that vision of much more collaborative approach into reality, and there may well be some points of detail that we will need to deal with as that legislation goes through. But it's going to be an infrastructure bill in this session of Parliament, so from when we're in opposition, that this will be we'll be bringing that forward, and we will want to ensure that those structures, those new structures, which have the broad support of the industry, get established as soon as possible to be able to maximise the benefits as the Wood Review suggests. And that's quite rare in a way, because you've also got even the SNP supporting the Wood Review, although I think they anticipate, were we in Scotland to vote to leave the United Kingdom, that you would have something along the lines of the Wood Review, but just a separate Scottish version of it, which doesn't seem to me to make very much sense, but there we go. Secondly, in relation to nuclear, I wanted to touch on nuclear being in this region and Sizewell, and the most recent of the built nuclear power plants in the UK, to underline the point that from the Labour perspective, we support new nuclear as part of the mix. We support and have supported through the course of the legislation contracts for difference as the mechanism to support and underwrite low carbon investment. In relation to Hinkley, the detail of some of that is still to be properly evaluated. The National Audit Office will have a role in relation to that, but our view is that new nuclear will need to play a part of our future energy mix for reasons of energy security, baseload and low carbon, which nuclear brings to that mix, and that obviously post Hinkley Sizewell may well be the second or the third in that programme, and that's something which we're keen to see developed. We know in this region, in terms of offshore wind, we touched on offshore wind. I come from the southeast of England, I suppose, but I live in Scotland. I represent a constituency in Scotland. We hear rather a lot in Scotland about the huge amounts of potential for offshore wind in Scottish waters. The reality is, as everyone I'm sure in this room knows, is that most and a big chunk of the offshore wind is actually off the east coast of England, and much further ahead than Scotland so far, but given the projects. And I think that means there's a lot which other parts of the UK can learn from here, as well as the future, I think, potentially very exciting future in further developing offshore wind off these shores. But all of this point to one or two key issues. One is in relation to skills. And I know from the work that EEEGR do and others in terms of very, very alive to this challenge, to be able to ensure that we have the opportunities for young people in this region and further up the east of England to be able to take the benefit of the opportunities that do exist. This is not that far from London, but it's quite distant from London in lots of other ways. And I think it's very important that we do everything we can to ensure that that we get people right from the very early stages of education interested in the right sort of subjects to be able to take the benefit of the jobs, the opportunities that there are and there will be. But I'm also very aware, and I hear this in the in the northeast of Scotland as well as in the east of England and also in the northwest of England, that where the skills gap isn't so much at the bottom, it's sort of somewhere in the middle. And 30 to 40-year-olds, and I will protect my modesty, but just to say I come towards the top end of that age bracket, and there are lots of people my age who actually through our reflect on my education who were driven and encouraged almost into away from STEM subjects, which I think are vitally important. We need to properly ensure the good work that has been done in recent years is continue to ensure that we don't have people in the next generation in the same position. Now, 2015 general election, May the 7th, so I won't be, you're quite right, at All Energy, even though it may be somewhere I've failed to get there each time in the last couple of years through various different things. If the Labour Party is in government and wins that election or forms part of that government, I think there are going to be a lot of issues for the Energy Minister and the Secretary of State for Energy to be dealing with coming into government from 2015. But I just want to make a couple of points. I understand, and we understand and know how important it is that there's clarity around the support regimes to encourage investment. We understand and appreciate issues around the difficulty in attracting capital. That's why one of our policy commitments is to effectively unshackle the Green Investment Bank so it's able to reach more projects and help in more significant ways away from the almost artificial agenda it has at the moment in terms of when it's able to actually take the role of a bank as opposed to a grant-giving body. We will also set a 2030 decarbonisation target to give a long-term sense of direction that I think is important for investment. And we will also make some reforms to the energy market. We published a green paper in November last year called Powering Britain, which we've been consulting on a range of different issues there. But I suppose the headline really is that it's about trying to get some transparency and clarity to the way the market works to provide confidence for the public and consumers that they can understand why they're paying what they're paying. That's important in terms of wider energy development and wider energy investment, because it's only with that clarity and transparency that I believe we can properly make the case for not just the amount of investment that's needed, but the type of investment and the way in which that then is translated into what people end up paying. So ensuring that there's ring fencing between supply and generation arms of the big companies, trading through an open pool, the establishment of an energy security board are all geared towards that agenda, because there is obviously a debate in energy that is very politically charged, but there is also a shared understanding and appreciation that we have a lot to do and we have a relatively short period of time to do it. And the longer that we spend time debating and discussing about how you do it, the less time we have to actually achieve what needs to be achieved. We know there are some very challenging times in the near future in relation to comfort we can draw from the level of spare capacity that's available in the system. There are short-term measures to help to deal with that, but that means for the medium and long term we need to have an environment and a framework where investment can happen. From the Labour perspective, we understand that, we want that to be the case. We need to build on EMR with some measures to bring clarity and transparency to the market, but with the same objective, that is to bring in and lever in the investment that we know is needed, and the investment that can bring real job and economic opportunities around the whole of the UK, including to the east of England, which, as I say, will have a leading role in the UK's energy future. Frankly, whoever wins the election in 2015, and being able to achieve the potential and be able to realise that potential requires, and will continue to require, coordination and work between industry, government and consumer, and bodies such as EEEGR, I think, are very well placed to help to make that coordination work and to facilitate some of those discussions so that we can all get the best out of what should be and could be, and I think really will be a very exciting future for the East of England in the energy sector. Thank you very much.
Now, I've had to bring the clock with me because it's obviously vital that we get Tom away on time. So if we both look like clock watchers, do excuse us. You've started to touch on investment there. I know one thing that is worrying people is this business of your proposal to have a price freeze. Can you expand a bit more on that?
Yep.
I think that, that just gets hands gripping on bits of the body.
Yes. The price freeze is part of this package of reforms that were set out in the Green Paper we published in November time. And it's for a fixed, specific, defined period of 20 months. Our intention is to legislate to vary, or to allow the Secretary of State to limit the licence conditions so that consumer prices cannot increase beyond the reference point. Now, the reference point will be probably the date of the election, unless people start playing games ahead of that. Although, to be fair to all of the big six, in discussions we've had with them, they're clear they are not intending to do so. So they understand the dynamic there. Now, that is to address a situation we have had, particularly when you look at the period 2008-9, where wholesale prices increased, retail prices went up, wholesale prices came down, retail prices didn't or hardly did. And that additional margin, is, even when you take into account of rising additional policy costs, has been maintained throughout that period. We think it's right that in a time when people have had squeeze on their incomes, that there is recompense for that, and that's the method we're using to do that, rather than some people suggested you should do or we should do like a windfall tax, but that will go to the Treasury as opposed to consumers. But it's for that fixed period, and during that time, the other reforms that I've talked about in passing, and there's more information in that Green Paper, and we'll be working those through the parliamentary process during the course of that 20 months. So at the end of that period, we have a market where some of those features have been properly defined, and there's more clarity and transparency in that market, and the regulator is better charged to be able to intervene should that intervention be necessary in the future. So that's the key to that. And of course, people will be aware of the CMA reference and the CMA process, which is just now about to start, or I think it started this week, I think it is. Now that will take, they have 18 months to do that work. They can extend it beyond that, but I suspect they will try and keep it within that 18 months. They are required to give an interim review after 11 or 12 months. Basically, that takes us to the period of time just after the election when we'll be starting the process of developing these issues and turning them into the legislation. So if the CMA come up with anything additional that we haven't addressed, we've got the opportunity to address those. But whether or not the CMA find any uncompetitive or anti-competitive behaviour, we believe the reforms we're talking about are necessary for the sake of transparency and clarity in the market in any case, and so we intend to push forward with them.
So you feel that watching the parliamentary process will give encouragement to people, for example, in this room and the industry, that you are not quashing investment?
We remain and have been supported all the way through the Energy Act, as now is the mechanisms that are being introduced by the government to support investment under EMR. That's relatively rare for a main opposition party to do so, but we actively voted in favour of it as that legislation was going through, precisely because we understand the need for confidence in the mechanisms that are being introduced. Yeah. We do not intend to change any of that, but the issues and the reforms that we're talking about are things which, some of them actually, I put down amendments during the course of the energy bill to try to introduce. They are supplementary to, not contradictory of, the Energy Act as exists, the EMR Act, and we absolutely very, very, very well aware and conscious of the need to lever in that investment, and we want to provide the best possible long-term framework for that investment to be able to happen. That's why the Energy Security Board is so important, to be able to set long-term sense of direction for policy as well, because without that, the danger is that everyone feels like policy will change every 3 or 4 years, or every 5 years, every time there's an election, or every time there's a bit of pressure, and then things don't happen. And as I said before, the longer you leave it, then the more expensive and the less options you have to be able to deal with what is actually a strategic issue and problem for the UK, whoever happens to be in government at the time.
Thank you for clarifying the fact that you will indeed set a target, the 2030 target, because I know that's something that worries people enormously. And let me say again that you are part of the no campaign, the no campaign, the no campaign. I'm unused to you being negative And that, sadly, is the bit that comes out of being a no person almost, isn't it? But don't bother to answer that, because I'm going to ask you something else. If, by any chance, the other lot, the yes lot, do win, presumably the Scottish produced content would no longer be classed as UK content for large infrastructure projects. Will that be good for England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and specifically perhaps for this neck of the woods?
Yeah, well, I mean, no can be a positive choice, and I believe it is for the 18th of September, and I hope it will be. And because, you know, the way in which things work at the moment, we have a very good system, I think, of being able to properly pool and share resources, and it's so true in support for low carbon and renewable energy, where we have a lot of potential resource and a lot of resource in Scotland. But that has partly been able to be developed because we have a system where the costs are spread across consumers and across the whole of the UK. Now, the SNP recognise this, and the Yes campaign recognise this, because they say it will continue post-independence. The other side of that, which I think is particularly worrying for those of us in Scotland, is that I do not understand how you will be able to convince people, bill payers, consumers in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, that on their bill they should be paying to underwrite the costs of generating energy in what will be a neighbouring and a no doubt friendly neighbour, but a foreign country. Now that is a big flaw in the SNP argument that I don't think they've ever properly addressed. Their answer sometimes is, well, England will need Scotland's electricity to keep the lights on. But we know, actually, the interconnection between England and Wales and other places in Europe far outstrips the interconnection with Scotland. We also know that when it comes to, National Grid had a look at this issue, and when it comes to that, if it came to that position, the choices for the southern bit of what is now the UK could very well be to, for example, in terms of offshore wind, extend existing offshore wind farms rather than fund a third round offshore project off the shore of Scotland. Now, you might think, if you're trying to do that logically, well, that would be cheaper and so better for consumers. And you might think, if you think about it logically, well, actually, we're going to miss out on the opportunity to properly understand and get real benefit from, you know, further out waters where you may get a better resource coming back in. But it's never going to be realised in a situation where you have that system being broken up. So I think it's a positive example of the way in which pooling and sharing across the United Kingdom works. And it's positive not just for Scotland, it's positive for England, Wales and Northern Ireland as well. And it's something which, a feature of the Union, which I think helps to make the case that I'm confident will continue to have the UK after the 18th of September.
Here. You mentioned Sir Ian Wood. We had the joy of having him here this morning. And one of the things that we were really asking him about was the whole fiscal side of things. Obviously, gas is half the price of oil. Will the Labour government have any sort of incentive or encouragement to help people invest in gas as opposed to oil?
In terms of the offshore environment. I mean, look, when Labour was last in government, Labour established Pilot, which was designed to be able to ensure that industry, regulation, government properly came together and discussed issues. I went in a previous life, I worked as an advisor in the Scotland office, and so I've been to a couple of Pilot meetings. So I'd seen it in action and actually thought it was a valuable forum. But I think Budget 2011 proved the limitations of Pilot. And what has happened since then in terms of establishing the fiscal forum where Treasury are properly taking it seriously is something which I think needs to be the forum through which some of these issues are properly evaluated and discussed. Because whilst it's always for the government to be able to set their own fiscal framework and set their own fiscal policy, being aware of what the potential consequences of those would be is something which is pretty valuable for government and something which is important to properly evaluate, not after it's happened and after there's been damage and after there's been drawbacks and issues around investment and things that have happened, and then people can say, see, told you it was a bad idea, to properly establish what those consequences might be ahead of time, and then the decision will be made in an informed manner. Now, I think in terms of the ongoing sort of overall fiscal review of the offshore environment, that's something which probably needs to be fed through those processes to be able to ensure that we get the right situation. Because sometimes people say, well, you don't want to chop and change the fiscal regime. Well, maybe you don't, but actually sometimes that drive for that comes from industry. You know, the drive for that in terms of the decommissioning relief has come from industry because there's recognised an issue. The drive towards the marginal field allowances, which Alistair Darling introduced when he was Chancellor, came from industry. They're very good reasons to be able to, make those changes, but it's about making sure that the changes happen in a way that the consequences and features of those are properly understood, and that's done in that sort of collaborative framework. And I see that as being the key way in which those things are properly evaluated.
So we need EEEGR and the East of England to march with banners saying, don't forget gas, now come on,
Yeah,
you've got
absolutely.
to go and catch a train.
Yep.